Tonight on SIP episode 129, we catch up with old friend Ana Keller from Keller Estate, and we're discussing the decision-making process of tearing out a vineyard and replanting, especially a vineyard that has 30-year-old vines and is prized Chardonnay, producing a wonderful Blanc de Blanc. Now, yes, there's an economic impact of that decision, but it might surprise you that there's also a climate change reason behind it as well. Stay tuned. SIP episode 129 is up next. Look who is first in the house. Brent, Dahlia, Eric, Jim B, Lori. Lori, even with, I believe, a Chicago connection, could not beat the #1 and reigning champion quiz answerer on speed. Jeff and Jane are in the house. MJ, I see you. Nelson and Liz, I see you. Peter, Sarasota Sipsters back in the house. Great to have you all there. Stephen, good to see you. I think there's been a couple weeks. Sandy, more and more folks are coming in. I said hello to Jeff and Jane. Ivy is there. Thank goodness, because this ship doesn't run without her. Eileen, awesome. Alicia, good. Everyone is here because there's bubbles. So I'm just going to have a little courage builder. Can't wait to get to our guests this evening. But before we do, my name is Martin Cody, co-founder of Cellar Angels, your direct-to-consumer entree into the finest limited production wines of Napa and Sonoma. Now, for those of you, I don't know if you saw the news, I'm going to talk a little bit about the weather, because we saw some significantly damaging weather in Provence this week, where a hailstorm has done some horrific damage to the vineyards, and they had already been past bud break and flowering. So their fingers are crossed on how much damage that did. And then also in New York's wine region, they had frost and 25 degrees last night and earlier this week. So fingers crossed for those folks. It has not been a good weather week. It also hasn't been a very good week for direct-to-consumer wine companies, or I should say good month. At the end of April, there's a direct-to-consumer company called Underground Cellar. They went bankrupt. So in the last 5 months, you had Wink go bankrupt, you had Underground Cellar go bankrupt. The thing that's most painful about Underground Cellar is part of their plan was that they would hold bottles for you in their cloud cellar. So you could buy 4 or 5 cases of wine, maybe have one of them shipped to your house, and then have them hold 4 cases. Turns out tens of thousands of people have hundreds of thousands of bottles of wine that they purchased that are nowhere to be found. There's some sort of fantasy inventory. People are out tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in some cases, and it's going to be very, very ugly class action lawsuits. But the net of that is the winery loses and the wine consumer loses. So we've invited a whole bunch of Underground Cellar folks to be here this evening. If you are here, welcome. This is Cellar Angels. This is SIP episode 129. And tonight we're talking bubbles, and one of the foundational blocks of bubbles, specifically as it relates to champagne, is Chardonnay. And so we've got a fantastic Chardonnay producer on, and I want to show you what champagne looks like from a perspective of soil, because this is what is so special about champagne, and it is, in a word, chalk. So here you can actually see, 15, 18 inches of topsoil, which is thick for parts of champagne, and then meters upon meters of chalk. For those of you that have actually been to Champagne and you go down in the caves, and there's hundreds of thousands of kilometers of caves underneath Epernay, underneath Rheims, underneath the entire region, and you can touch and scrape the walls, and it's chalk. It's unreal. I encourage everyone to go there. Part of the reason is because it was underwater for hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years. And when we go to Google Earth later in the program, I'll show you exactly what that looks like, and really how that's having an influence on some of the vineyard decisions of tonight's guest. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is a little bit of what Cellar Angels does. Last thing I want to show you before we go to tonight's guests is what's coming up in the next future SIP episodes. So you go to the Cellar Angels website, you go to events, and you click on SIP virtual wine events. And here you will get an update of exactly what this program is all about. But more importantly, you're going to see who is our next few guests. So I think it's interesting. Just about every single person we've ever interviewed for the last 3 years has somehow, way, shape, or form touched UC Davis. And on June 30th, we are going to have the science of sensory evaluation of wine and more with Dr. Hildegard Heyman from UC Davis. She's been there since 2003, and many of the folks that we've had on were underneath her tutelage as they matriculated through UC Davis. Next week, by the way, or 2 weeks from now, how the banking crisis has impacted the wine industry. So 90% of Napa and Sonoma wineries had exposure to Silicon Valley Bank. What does that mean going forward? Peter G., that might be something I know you and some of your colleagues would be interested in. So go to the Cellar Angels website, go to events. If you ever have any challenges navigating, click on the Angels. It'll take you right back home. You can actually see what's happening. You can rotate and get over to the marketplace through here. Very, very simple. You'll be asked to join a newsletter. It's easy. What also is easy is getting great wines from great people. And tonight we have such a person. So I want to introduce tonight's guest, singular. This is a longtime friend of Cellar Angels and really just salt of the earth. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give it up for Ana Keller of Keller Estate. Cheers.
Cheers.
Good to see you.
Delighted to be here. Nowhere else I would rather be on a Friday afternoon.
Awesome. And fun fact for all of you dog lovers that were here last week when we had winery dogs, Ana has 3 winery dogs sitting at her feet right now. So they are extremely hyperactive. It's the sedative is working. The sedative is just laying in the sunshine. I want to catch up with you because we're going to talk about old vine Chardonnay. And before we do that, why don't we go through the Keller Estate story, which, by the way, this is, if that looks like a golf cart path, it could be that wide. It does kind of look like that, but it's actually a racetrack. So walk me through how there's a racetrack on your estate.
Well, my family I love cars, but my family loves cars. And I love cars too. I can't say I don't. But my father, ever since he was a little boy, his passion has been vintage cars. And at one point he had some vintage cars, and I was born and raised in Mexico City, and we came to California in the late 70s. He had some cars warehoused, like many people, in an industrial park and a storage facility. And one day they really decided, actually, he was just telling me that story today. My dad is 91 years old, or as he likes to say, 91 years young. And we were talking a little bit about the story, and he was telling me, like, I don't know, all my friends have their cars in these horrible industrial parks, and I wanted a beautiful place where I could be. And they would always drive the windy roads of Sonoma, and they knew about this beautiful stretch near Petaluma. And it came up for sale, the property with one house, which is where I'm actually sitting in and I live. And they decided that they'd buy the property, and little by little, they built a garage to fix the cars. And then they would always try to drive around a dirt road around the property. So they decided, my dad's a civil engineer and he just likes building. That's his second passion is building. So he said, well, why don't we pave a little bit of the road so that we can test drive the cars? So this is 1988, and they had a racetrack or a little road around, because we don't really like racing. We really enjoy just gentle drives. But it's great to be able to test these very old machines in a safe environment before you go on 101. So
when you say he grew up with a fondness for vintage cars, define vintage car for me.
Pre-1945 cars.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So really old cars.
And so he buys them and then restores them.
Exactly. He loves to restore them, study them, collect them. They just came back. So my 22-year-old son and my dad just came back from a road trip to Paso Robles. So they went down on a little rally that some friends came up with. And so they drove around Paso for 3 days. So in a 1910 Rolls Royce.
Okay. That sounds like something I could get into.
If somebody's driving you.
Exactly. 3 days in a 1910 Rolls Royce. Does this have like the hand
It's
crank
a chauffeur.
engine?
It does have a hand crank engine, but the trick is, since he's not, he's not driving anymore. He finds cars where he can be well protected from the environment, which, as we all know, sometimes in wine country, we get a lot of sun, we get a lot of hail. So he likes to be safe and comfortable.
Yeah, I'm with Dahlia. She says it's cruising. You're cruising in the car. You're not
We're
racing.
cruising, exactly.
I like it. And Karen A, hello to you. I want to say, okay, so you bought the property in 88?
We bought it actually in 83, and they had
Okay.
built the road and built the garage. And then one day they said, well, you know what, this is really bare. Petaluma at that time for many years has been just a farm country. It's primarily dairy, so cows
Mhm.
were around, and they thought, I'm sure we can grow something. So they went up to Davis, like everybody around here, and they asked David and said, well, what can we grow? This is where we are physically. And the University of Davis said, you know what, I think it's too cool out there. Probably nobody's growing grapes there, but if you want to plant something, plant Chardonnay. It's the most noble of grapes to grow. And if it doesn't ripen, you could always produce a sparkling wine or sell the grapes for sparkling wine. So those were kind of like, that was the table they had. I joined them a few years later. My passion is grow. I love plants. I love dogs and I love plants. And I studied biochemistry. And I was kind of going through grad school, and Dad thought it might be good to bring me into the business. So he enticed me to go and visit one of our great buyers, Rombauer, like in the late 19.
Wait, back up a couple seconds, because first of all, he invited you into the business. There really wasn't a business. And I want to go a little bit further back than that. So the group decided that, okay, we've got a road now, but we should probably plant something. Davis says plant Chardonnay. None of them had any agricultural background, did they?
None of them have any agricultural background, but we found some solid people. It's funny, it's a small community. We found some solid people. So the Ceja family, very
yeah.
well-known growers in the region. Armando actually planted the vineyard for us. So we've known, he helped us farm. He helped us find the first grape customer, and they were very happy. They were selling their grapes to Rombauer for the first few years. And one year they got a little greedy and they told Rombauer, why don't you keep a ton for us, make a ton of grapes for us as Chardonnay, and you can keep the rest. Little did he know that a ton of fruit produces over 60 cases of wine. And I challenge anybody on this chat to drink 60 cases of Chardonnay a year.
Challenge accepted. I think we've got some eager folks that will be happy to try that challenge. So that was, okay, so then you decide to do that. You're a biochemist, or going into that, that's a big leap. What was the draw? Was there something, you said you love animals, you love plants. So when I think of plants, I don't think of grapevines as a biochemist. Was there a light bulb that went off? Was there something that, your epiphany where you thought, oh, this resonates with me?
You know what? I love medicinal plants. I love things that are useful. And he told me to go, I went. And as soon as I walked into the cellar and the smells and the aromas and the challenge, we had a stuck fermentation, and my dad didn't know what it was. And he said, why don't you go out and figure out what it is? And just the challenge of having something convert sugar to alcohol, that was fascinating from day one. So I know that it was just that day I said, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life.
And so for some folks that may not be familiar with the phrase stuck fermentation, when does that happen and why does it occur?
So as we know, we ferment, the grapes have sugar, and that sugar, we want to convert it into alcohol. And we've got yeast that will do that conversion. Sometimes if it's very cold, or if the juice doesn't have the right nutrients, the yeast don't have enough, they can't reproduce, and they can't turn the sugar into alcohol. So there's many little factors that can, sometimes you'll see at wineries, the barrels are sitting out in the sun. And sometimes they're just sitting in the sun so that they get a little bit more heat, and the yeast can kind of get, wake up. It's a little bit like, I always say it's really easy. It's like making yogurt. You can't make yogurt inside the fridge. You have to leave it outside on the shelf. So yeast need a little bit more warmth to actually reproduce and do what they're doing, which is take something that is a nutrient, and the byproduct in our case is the alcohol.
And so when dad said go, and Doug, I see you, nice to see you, Denise, nice to see you, Eve, nice to see you. When he said, go figure out how to fix this, where did you go?
Well, I went to Rombauer and, I talked with them and they explained the different options. They didn't leave us hanging. They said, well, you've got these choices. We can do A, B, and C. And so we talked through it and we turned it into wine. We never actually bottled that wine, which is kind of really interesting. We eventually gave it back to them. But that was the day that I realized, this is what we want to do. In 2000 is when we actually started saying, like, we are going to start making wine. And we looked out and searched for a team that could help us, because for as much as chemical background I had never made wine in my life. And I had never run a business in my life. I was 27 and very happy to be involved, but not really kind of the right person with, all of the background to do it.
So that was 2000 when you just started to produce your own wines, but you had decided to plant vineyards on the estate before then. How did the decision, because you're already selling grapes to Rombauer and other various producers. When did you start planting the vineyards?
So our first vineyard was planted in 1989, and we planted 13 acres of Chardonnay. We planted specifically UC Davis clone 4 Chardonnay. And that is the reason why we're here today, because it's by 2019, those vines it was their 30th anniversary.
Wow. And so for those of you that purchased a sip kit and are drinking the 2019 Blanc de Blanc Keller Estate sparkling wine, it is the last time that wine will be made. There is no more La Cruz Vineyard. There is, just not these vines. So you're drinking a little bit of history. And if you don't have this bottle of wine, there's still some left on the Cellar Angels website. I would go out and grab it, because there might be a chance that you don't make this a wine again, isn't there?
There is, those vines, when we planted that, when actually I'm going to let my parents planted those vines, we knew, we've learned a lot in 30 years. And as I replant that vineyard, I know I'm going to do things a little bit differently. And it's going to take many years before I'm at that beautiful stage. Just because we pulled it out doesn't mean the vineyard was not a beautiful vineyard.
And it's interesting. So you pulled it out after the 2019 vintage, and it was how many acres?
13.
So it was 13 acres of Chardonnay. And like you said, you've learned a few things in the 30 years that it was there. And one of the things that I noticed in France, and some of you may, if you read like I do, you keep up on this, and we've talked about it on a bunch of episodes for SIP, is climate change. And where you see Rams in the Champagne region of France, it's probably as far north as you could grow grapes from a commercial viability standpoint. But now climate change is influencing that. How has climate change kind of impacted the way you're looking at this vineyard site?
So when we planted this vineyard site, we thought it was a very cold region, and we wouldn't really be able to ripen anything to make still wines. Champagne or sparkling wines normally are harvested earlier in the year. We don't need the sugar content to make, high alcohol wines, and we want that really beautiful, bright acidity. So you're normally harvesting early. Now, 30 years later, we can ripen Chardonnay, no problem. We can we can ripen Pinot Noir, we can ripen Syrah. So it really isn't a question of can we ripen. I would say for me, the biggest question is, what if I don't have water? What can I grow if I don't have water? That is, that's been the question I've been posing myself for the last 10 years. And
what's your answer?
Well,
apples?
No, God, no. My answer is, I guess the biggest answer is, we are replanting a portion of that vineyard to Chardonnay, because Chardonnay is a noble grape and it will do well. If we're able to get it water on a regular basis as it establishes itself, then we're able to pull away the water. We now farm organically. When my parents started, we were conventional farming, but in the past 5 years, we've converted to organic farming. And part of what we're able to do with organic farming is we have really healthy plants. And those healthy plants can weather dry periods, wet periods, shortage of sunshine or nutrients. So I think farming organically is the way to resolve for us a portion of the global warming problem.
And go ahead.
No, I was going to say the real varietal that we think, in terms, for me, Syrah has become that drought grape. So I think that we are going to bet a little bit more on Syrah, but we are also experimenting with an early ripening, a little bit of Riesling. So we still enjoy, we were planting things out here when nobody else was planting grapes, and we've always been looking at what we can do next.
Well, and I think it's fascinating too that in the early 80s, UC Davis tells you to try Chardonnay because it's a very, very cool weather grape and you should be able to get it. If you can't, you can, sell it to a sparkling producer. Now, 40 years later, you're looking at warm weather grapes. You're looking at grapes that are drought resistant to a degree, and it's only 40 years. I mean, that's a blink of an eye, and the climate has changed that much. And it's funny when we show Google Earth a little bit later, when you look at where Roms is, it's literally directly across from the southern portion of England. And now there's been a giant influx of Chardonnay growers moving over to England because it's finally warm enough that they can actually produce great or more sparkling wine. They've been producing sparkling wine for a while, but it's interesting to see what's happening over there because of climate change. And how did the aspect of the rose change?
Well, I think that for centuries, climate was consistent. So for centuries, Europeans had the same problem. And basically the problem, whether it's in Champagne or in Germany, was let's try to get as much sunshine as we can to the vines. But in the past 50 years, that consistency has been lost. When we planted 30, 40 years ago, we thought, well, we need to do the same thing that France is doing. We need to find as much sun for the grapes as we can. We knew we were a little warmer. We were betting that we had the same consistent weather patterns where we were looking for sunshine. So back in 1989, we planted the rose with the north-south orientation so that we could maximize the morning sun and the afternoon sun. 30 years later, those poor vines were getting sunbeat every afternoon. They were just really dehydrating, and it was just really hard for the vines we couldn't create enough shade for the vines. So we've turned around the rose, and now they get a little bit of morning sun and a little bit of afternoon sun, but we really protect them a lot more from the sun.
That's incredible. I just can't believe how much it's changed in 40 years. It's amazing. I go ahead.
I was going to say, in 40 years, we've also, the benchmark is not only Europe now. We've all, Europe is learning from us. We're learning from South Africa. New Zealand is giving us lessons. So Chile. And so there's so much knowledge being generated at the same time with different conditions that when we've had fires, Australia teaches us something, we teach them. Our knowledge goes to France, and a little bit like we eventually did when we have the phylloxera. So I think that there's a lot of education that goes across borders.
No, and that is good because that rising tide is going to raise all ships, and we as consumers benefit from all that. I want to call out Brent H because Monday's pop quiz the question was in method Champenois, what step removes yeast sediment? The answer was C, disgorging. Brent H was first. Brent H got the question right within 1 minute of the email being sent. People, that's like 9 weeks in a row that Brent has got the question right. So either someone needs to get to Ivy and say, hey, don't send it until 7:15 or do something, before it's issued, because Brent apparently has an alert set and he's also smart. Scotland K, you were second. Jim B, honorable mention, is in third. So pretty impressive. Brent seems no one can knock Brent off the top pedestal here. As I mentioned, we talked about Old Vine Zinfandel, and you just got done saying that the vineyard was 30 years of age. What factors went into your decision to actually replace it? Because as you mentioned, it'll take you years to get to the level of complexity that these grapes were offering you especially in this Blanc de Blanc. So what type of decision making do you, the winemaker, struggle with in this capacity?
Well, for one, we know we're not going to have production. 13 acres aren't going to produce anything for the next 5 years. So we have to strategize and find ways to compensate for the loss of grapes. But that vineyard, which normally we aim to get 3 tons per acre, we were done to 1.5 tons. And it was a beautiful 1.5 tons, but the tonnage wasn't there. And the vines were trying to grow, but we were already having many of the vines that couldn't produce a healthy canopy. And that was really the decision that it was just time to, we had regrafted some vines. I'd been working with different, techniques. I'd done into biodynamics. I'd gone through the entire toolbox to see if I could really give them a few more years. And, I had come to the end of that road, and I realized it was a great opportunity to make better wine.
And it's interesting because we, the new world, we tend to replace vineyards faster than they do in the old world. And specifically in Champagne, I know the average Chardonnay vines there are 35 years of age. There's vines in Australia, the average age of the Chardonnay vines in Australia range between 50 and 125 years of age. So it's amazing this just sustainability, the resistance, the vigor of this vine, that it can produce fruit for such a long period of time. There is actually several hectares in Champagne where the vines were planted before World War I, and they're still producing amazing clusters. And so I marvel at what happens when these vines get to that age, because the yield is cut in half, but boy, the fruit that they produce is so special and so nuanced and so structurally pure. And then it's hard. I just think it's like you're sacrificing a child, or you're getting rid of a loved one by having to rip it all out.
There was a moment when I was like, could we keep the vines that are healthy and replant? You're trying to go through all of this. I want to save as much as I can, but at the end of the day, I realized that we had learned enough in 30 years that we deserved the opportunity to start things right. We had probably overproduced in a few years, and the vines weren't as strong, and it was good. And I will say that there was also a cathartic moment because we were ripping out in 2020. So it felt like a good year to start something new.
Good point. And so you mentioned the younger vines are going to take quite a few years to get to a maturity level to where you can put them in the bottle. But how does age impact a vine, from cluster production, from depth, not Mother Nature always has a huge role in it, obviously, each year, but what happens when a vine gets older?
Well, as the vine gets more and more established, the root system is better developed and it's able to tap into deeper areas. It is very resilient. And, I think one of the things is really important is plants' purpose in producing fruit is the next generation. When a plant is older, a plant produces fruit to make sure that there's seeds in case it needs to produce an offshoot. And when a plant as it grows older, it's even more important to produce better fruit. Then better fruit, by that I mean better fruit that has more nutrients, that is richer in quality, so that the plant, can produce a better offspring. That is one of the reasons why, by kind of sending what we call hormonal messages to the plants, restricting water, cutting down the weak fruit, and all of these things that we're doing to the plant basically is telling, oh my God, the world's coming to an end. You've got to focus. Don't focus on green leaves. There's no point being a big plant. Focus all your energy into the fruit. And so I think after a certain number of years, the plants understand that, and they get very efficient at putting all of their energy into producing great fruit.
I like the phraseology there, sending hormonal signals to the plant. Do or die, life or death. Focus on the important stuff here. We're gonna channel your mind to focus on what's important. And then you talked about Riesling. Where did the fondness and desire to plant Riesling come from?
Well, I will give our winemaker, Julian Teichmann, is German, so I'll give him some credit. And we were talking, we sat down and said, where are we going to be? Well, where are they going to be in 100 years? Where's this estate? We've only made wines from the fruit that we grow on our property for the past 23 years and grown for the past 33 years now. And we talked about Syrah as an option. And we also talked about the beautiful minerality that we have on the property and the need to experiment in white varietals that branch away from the traditional Chardonnay. We have a little bit of Pinot Gris, but Pinot Gris is a straightforward kind of a grape. You know, you produce it, it's very straightforward. But the Riesling is, it's like exquisite, and it ages beautifully, and it's got complexity, and it's one of those, just like Pinot Noir. So Riesling is one of those wine, you know, we just look forward to making that wine. We know it's going to be a challenge. We know we're going to find complexity, and we can take it in many directions. So in a sense, we're not betting a lot, but we're planting 2 acres, and we want to see where we can take it.
It's also one of the most food-friendly wines as well. So it goes with a ton of different dishes, which is what I love about Riesling. Hot, spicy,
great, yeah.
meat. I mean, it's incredible. All right, for those of you that want to knock Brent off the quiz capital of pedestal, we'll start our first poll question. So as we talk about Chardonnay in Champagne, let's figure out what percentage of Champagne in France is actually planted to Chardonnay. And this is a speed round because you can't Google this. So I'm going to give this 10 seconds, 10, 9, counting by 2, 7, 4, 3.5, 2, 2.5, going up, and 1, half a second left. Pencils down. So the answer, interesting, no one said 20%. For those of you that said 40%, you're wrong. 50% would be huge. You're actually wrong as well. 30% is the answer. 30% of the 60 some odd thousand hectares of Champagne are planted to Chardonnay. Interestingly, 40% are planted to Pinot Noir, and obviously the remaining is Pinot Meunier. There are 319 crus or villages in Champagne, and there's the amount of hectares they have. Some of these hectares, most of them are 1.4 hectares, which is literally the size of a tennis court. And there's tens of thousands of them. It's incredible, the tapestry that looks like when you go into Champagne and look at these tiny little vineyard blocks. So that's that quiz. So the second quiz question is, what percentage of Sonoma County is planted to Chardonnay? Now, we probably have someone online who knows the answer to this, or should. Again, no Googling. This is the honor system. And I hope someone knows this definitively, because I forgot to look up the answer. 5, 4, 3, 2. Where's the question, Dahlia? It should be on the screen. What percentage of Sonoma County is planted to Chardonnay? Just type in your number, Dahlia. The numbers are 10, 25, 33, and 39. Ending the poll, sharing the results. And this one has a lot more smart people. The answer is, in fact, 25%. So there are 62,000 acres of vines in Sonoma County. 15,500 of them are planted to Chardonnay. And that was as of 2021. Probably changes every year, I would imagine, as they rip out more and plant this, but you get a pretty good idea that 25% of all vines in Sonoma County are Chardonnay. Now, one of the neat things that has happened in Sonoma County is the recognition of a new AVA called the Petaluma Gap. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Anna, that it's the newest AVA. Is that?
It's no longer the newest. West Sonoma Coast finally was able to get an appellation. So
Okay.
It is great because we have finally finished redefining the Sonoma Coast.
Finally, exactly. So we're fortunate that Ana, who I don't know when she sleeps, was instrumental in getting the Petaluma Gap AVA recognized. So walk us through kind of a high-level overview of what it means to be established as an AVA.
So the AVA is a federally granted gift that that a region can obtain when it proves that there has been a historical evidence of growing grapes in an area, where we can prove that on a map you can geographically position it, and where you can explain that they are elements that are similar to the entire region. In the case of the Petaluma Gap, we have the town of Petaluma is very easy to point on a map, so that explained geographically where we were. Some of the first settlers, the Spanish who came to California, were already growing grapes, so we had that establishment of grapes growing in the Petaluma Gap, literally over a century ago. And the third is we have the wind. So the Petaluma Gap does hold, it's the first AVA established not on soils, but on wind patterns.
Oh, really? That's fascinating. First of all, I think it's interesting that one of the requirements is you have to establish that grapes have been grown there. Is there a specified period of time, like at least for 50 years or?
It's not established. It just has to be, you can't just say like in my backyard, I've got grapes and it's been there there has to be, you do make research, but there's not a definite period of time.
Okay. And then every other AVA in Napa and Sonoma are all soil driven, topography driven, and the Petaluma Gap is driven by wind patterns?
It is. So for those who have visited California and have gone out to the coast and enjoyed oysters at Bodega Bay, the mountain range, instead of running parallel to the coast, actually runs perpendicular to the coast. And that creates an opening from the Pacific Ocean. We get instead of just getting the rolling fog coming in, it actually sweeps in as wind, and it comes through the Petaluma Gap, which is at Bodega Bay, hits the town of Petaluma, then goes all the way into Sonoma Mountain, where it turns, it actually makes a little bit of a turn, and it goes out to the San Pablo Bay. And that wind actually goes all the way into San Francisco. And that's one of the reasons why San Francisco is so cold in summer, because we're getting this fog influence that's just kind of creating a wind tunnel. If you look outside my window, it's extremely windy outside right now. And it'll be like that every day of the year, which is great for grape growing because it cools, we get some nice sunshine, but then we get a cool down early in the afternoon.
Interesting. And I've often heard Petaluma referred to as kind of the region's air conditioner, because it's just that gap. It's so funny to see some of the pictures and some of the time-lapse video where the fog is just getting sucked right off the ocean, right through the gap, blankets the valley. I was unaware that the breeze coming, into San Francisco is coming down the San Pablo Bay, across the bay and into the city. That's fascinating. And I understand now why they said grow Chardonnay, because Pinot is usually a little bit more fickle, but it does like that cool climate.
It does. The great thing is that the wind, it actually has a couple of things that we've learned that make it unique. That wind shuts down the vine, so it actually stops its maturation process. So come in the afternoon, instead of continuing to ripen, it sort of slows down, and that helps us retain acidity. The second thing that it does is that the wind is beating on the grape skin, and that wind is just literally like a sailor's skin. It's beating on the skin and it's thickening the skins. And all of the tannins and flavor is in the skins. The juice is really water, acid, and sugar, but all of the tannins and the flavors come from the skins. So by having thicker skins, we actually get really nice flavors, great tannins, a lot of structure to the wines.
Fascinating. It's funny, we had Ryan Hill on from Hill Family Estate several weeks back, and he talked about the wind in Carneros. And when, when the wind blows 9 miles an hour, to your point, the vine shuts down. And when it's higher than that, so he says, you just have your grape clusters getting extended hang time, extended sunlight, and it just builds up that complexity in the cluster. I did not know it actually thickened the skin too, which is what gives that great flavor to the Chardonnay and Pinot Noir from the region. Fantastic. All right, so I'm going to show people where you are, but before I do, let's show a little bit about when I talked about the chalk earlier in the broadcast. The chalk from Champagne is strictly because it was underwater for 1,000,000 years. And when you see what that looked like, you have France essentially 75 million years ago underwater. So here you have the Great African Plate. You actually have the North American Plate. Here's Florida sliding over and shifting over to North America. But here's essentially Europe. And so all of this crustacean, sedimentary, oceanic pressure is what is causing, you've seen the great chalk walls and hills and mountainsides of southern England. It's the same thing across the English Channel right here into France. And so northern France is all chalk, and Chardonnay loves that. Pinot Noir loves that. And similarly, when we get to California, California too has its own history of water. This is California 25 million years ago. Wait, you're not seeing what I'm seeing. Hang on. That was a boo-boo. There we go. Now you should see California. So 25 million years ago, this is California. Some people say this is going to be Florida in about 50 years. So you've got the 3 to 5 foot rise by 2100. But this is the San Pablo Bay, Ana, that actually went all the way up. You have so much oceanic influence in the region of Napa and Sonoma. It's amazing to see some of the fossils and things like that up in some of the hillsides and mountaintops in the wine region. And this is why. So this has a huge influence. And same thing with Colorado. There's fossils that people find of shells and stuff like that. And this is why. That water influence has a tremendous impact on the soils and the vines. And when we look at it from a Google Earth standpoint, this is what it looks like today. So when I show you where Aromas is in Champagne, you can see just how far north it is in France. And if you go across the channel, I mean, you're not at London, you're just below, but now all this area is warming. And so that means this area is warming, and you are going to see in the next 10 to 15 years, you're already seeing it now, land prices for vineyards is skyrocketing in southern England. And they're planting more and more Chardonnay because England wants to be a major sparkling producer. So it's interesting to see how far north this is. And now it's not getting too warm in our lifetime, but it's definitely having an influence on how they're growing, what they're growing, and it's expanding north in England. Going back, buckle up. I showed you what it looked like 25 million years ago. This is what it looks like now. You still have a lot of influence of water. And this is Petaluma right down here. As Ana talked about, you have this gap from Bodega Bay in the mountains. And this is what just is a vacuum and sucks all the cool air right in through the Petaluma Gap, down into the San Pablo Bay, and then on into San Francisco. And the fog that comes in every day, and then burns off every morning, afternoon, it is fascinating and beautiful to look at. And then when we get to Keller Estate, it too is about as magical a piece of property as one can feast their eyes on. I don't know if you ever get tired, Ana, of these hills and this countryside and
I don't. I love it. It's just, our biggest fight around here is we eventually lose the green hills for the golden hills. And we're always placing bets. When are they going to turn golden? But we definitely, it's just a beautiful sight. And we're blessed that we face the Petaluma River, which is actually, it's not a very wide river, but it's surrounded by marshlands. And across from us, we see the Olompali Mountain. And I don't see construction. I see nature every day, wherever I turn around. Impressive.
Now, literally looking at this property and the estate, I do see the cruising track.
Yep.
And I also see vineyards, and I see a lot of foliage that does not look like grapes. What else do you have on the property?
So we have 36 acres of olive groves. We have Spanish olives and Italian olives.
36 acres?
It's yeah, all those little dots that you see that look like, all those dots are olive trees.
Why so many?
Well, if I told you, you wouldn't believe me. But my dad, we used to have a landscape manager who would encourage my dad to do absolutely anything, including 36 acres of olive trees. So they started planting them, and this is why I really get involved into landscaping projects.
So, and it's interesting too, because I wonder how close I can get to this, but these, for everybody who has not been to Keller Estate, and I strongly encourage you to get there, are garages storing vehicles. Yes.
Exactly. So you've got the tasting room in the center, and on the sides we have our collection car rooms. And underneath the hills behind you, we have the cave that leads all the way to the winery.
Right. Okay. So the cave, does it go back here?
Yeah, exactly.
And then all the way to the winery.
All the way to the winery. So the beautiful thing about what we do and what I love to share is, when you get to Keller Estate, all of the wines that you taste have never left the property. From grape to the day you taste them, they've always been on site. And understanding a little bit how we farm, how fast the fruit can get from the vineyard to the winery. It's really important to be able to pick at night to make sure that we don't lose any of that beautiful fruit, the integrity of the grapes, and we start processing them early in the morning is really crucial. But you also get a sense of place, and we have a beautiful view of Mount Tam. It's just kind of it's a little piece of heaven, to be quite honest.
That is interesting. I don't know if we've ever encountered where it never ever leaves. The grapes never leave the property. I mean, it's not as if you are throwing them in bins and then trucks and you're carting them up, 101 or anywhere to get them to a production facility. You have the production facility on site.
We do. And that is when we say estate, I think a lot of people don't really understand. It's on one thing, it's beautiful because we're able to preserve the quality and make sure that the fruit is intact and it reflects a sense of place. So all of our wines have this common trait that they're made in the same area. They have the same beautiful minerality, the great acidity. In the case of some of our wines, we have a gorgeous spiciness to them. Unfortunately, we can only make the wines that we can grow on our property. So I don't, I frequently, and I hope my husband doesn't hear me, he wants me to grow Tempranillo. And I'm like, no, that's not going to work around here, honey. So we've got our limitations.
How often does Arturo have a driver going around the track with him?
So my dad, as frequently as he can, and actually they'll come down for dinner frequently, and every day before he goes back home, he lives at the top of the property. He'll go around the track. He and my mom will go around the track and they'll just make sure everything looks great. I'll get a couple of pictures saying like, this could be better, Anna. And that is one of the things that I've learned. I've learned to be very comfortable with it can be better.
Oh my goodness, that is outstanding. That property is incredible. All right, I'm going to put you on the spot. 2019 Blanc de Blanc. We're going to do aromas, flavors, and pairings. So I'm going to get a little top off.
So the first thing that I want to say while you're getting a top off is you have one kind of glass and there's two kinds of glasses. I personally, when I want to smell and really enjoy the aromas of a sparkling wine, I like to go for a little bit of a rounder glass. I feel that you can get a little bit more expansion of the aroma. Sometimes the very straight glasses don't seem to give, you don't get the generosity of the aromas that the wine has.
I would agree with you 100% on that. And it's interesting because I can't remember the year that it happened to where we went from, there's a couple different stories about it with regards to why did we go from the coupe to the stem and part of it is, I actually think that the one that has the most legitimate possibility of being true is service, because you can only fit, 5 to 6 coupes on a server tray when you can fit 15 or more. So stems, depending upon how tightly they're packed, so they could serve more, they could serve them faster. And I think there's an economic aspect to it. But I totally agree with you that for our purposes, when we are assessing sparkles and bubbles, this is our glass of choice. The vintage coupe champagne glass that we have on the Cellar Angels website. It's from our favorite producer of stemware, Bodega del Vino, made out of Verona, Italy. Every glass is handmade, mouth blown, and this is just elegance in your hand. And you're right, the aromas jump out of this glass much more so than a stem.
Well,
So what do
and
you get?
just on the practical side, it's a lot easier to clean this than this.
Yes,
But I'm just being practical here. Well, for me, I think that the Blanc de Blanc is 100% Chardonnay sparkling wine. So you will get that beautiful. I always get a lot of jasmine and pear flowers. There's that citrus smell because you're capturing Chardonnay kind of like at its infancy stage. We don't get those overripe tropical notes and aromas. We're looking for the early aromas of Chardonnay.
Okay. And how would this compare, this 2019, to say your 2010 Blanc de Blanc, 29 Blanc de Blanc? Because we are talking about aged Chardonnay and what it brings to the table, if you will. Is it the depth? Is it the elegance? Is it the balance? Is it all of it?
I think it's a combination of things, but definitely the yeast. There's a brioche yeasty component that with time in the bottle, you kind of, it just starts softening up a little bit more. We try to do our wines, they're all brut, so they have a smidget of residual sugar, very below anything that you taste. But I'm always looking. So for me, I love making wines that are food friendly. So even our Blanc de Blanc, I sometimes feel that in some of the very dry Blanc de Blancs, you can get a little too angular and just the acid hits you. And I can't enjoy more than a glass because it really doesn't feel, it's too tight. So I wanted a wine that was a little bit more generous and a little bit more food friendly. I think this is kind of a great wine with scallops and shrimp, and it just kind of brightens anything you eat.
Well, and I love your comment about the brioche aspect and that yeasty kind of doughy component that, in my opinion, that those are my favorite sparklings, my favorite champagnes have that element. For me, I don't like that angular aspect. I don't like that jarring acidity that's very linear. I like it with a little bit more depth and expression. So this has that, and I can totally see it does have the acidity that, backbone, which is why a heavy shrimp in saffron sauce or oysters, something like that would be amazing. And Ivy had this Blanc de Blanc with chicken and kimchi dumplings today.
Oh, wow. She's been cooking. I think she should share that recipe with all of us.
I think she should. How do people, we talked about this beautiful estate behind me, and everybody that comes from Cellar Angels gets a ride with Arturo. How do people actually come taste with you?
So we offer tours and tasting. We are a little bit, as you saw on the map, we are from San Francisco, 45 minutes north of San Francisco, and we invite guests to join us for a tour and tasting. As you've probably talked to many of your friends at Cellar Angels, there's no point in doing 6 wineries a day. You won't remember anything. And we want to make your trip memorable and enjoyable. So we invite people to relax, go on a walk with us. If you've got a furry friend, they're always welcome. We actually are also a family-friendly winery. I've got 3 sons of my own, and growing up before the world of iPads, you just didn't go wine tasting because you couldn't do anything with the kids. And we always, as long as dogs and kids are well behaved, they're welcome to come with families. We see a lot of multi-generational families coming for visits. And I think that's the beauty of wine. You sit down and you enjoy food, wine, family, friends, conversation. So we want to recreate that when you visit us. So we'll take you on a tour. You'll walk around the vineyards, visit our cellar, visit the cave, and then just have a nice sit down tasting with us.
Yeah, this is another example everyone where you're not going to be 5 deep at a tasting room table at a bar or anything like that. This is an immersion experience. You get to walk among the vines. You get to learn about viticulture. You get to see the estate in its glory. And it is just, if you are uptight and stressed about anything, a little visit here out in the country will take you to a different place, because it is spectacularly beautiful here. And the wines are amazing. And we haven't even talked about the Pinot Noir. So I highly encourage you to get out here and visit Ana. And I want to talk one more thing, Ana, about something that was influential in California, because next week, kids, is the 47th anniversary of the Judgement of Paris. And the Judgement of Paris, for those of you that have not heard of it, is essentially the wine shot heard around the world that happened in 1976. And we're going to talk a little bit about it in an upcoming episode, because it was really what changed the game of wine. And it put California on the map. We'll get into details, but how did, when you came to the vineyard in 2000, obviously it's quite 15 or so, or 25, 26 years past that judgment, but it was still resonating. What did it mean to California? And specifically, how did you recognize that achievement at Keller Estate?
Well, I think honestly, I always say that the door had been open, but by the time we stepped in, we could make wine. It wasn't a can we, like, what are you doing here? They really had opened the door and set the stage, and also set the stage for creativity. They were clearly saying, we're going to do it our way. And I think that's what was recognized at the Judgement of Paris, is that there's not just one way of making wine. And the French were kind of like, oh, no, c'est pas possible. It has to be our way. And I think that's really what it showed, is it was the opening door to innovation in grape growing and viticulture.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. And I'm excited for that, because you're right. The French said, we dare you, essentially, bring your best. And we'll get into great detail about Stephen Spurrier and how that whole event came about. And by the way, it wasn't a fluke, because they did it on the 30th anniversary. They tasted it again with the same producers, and the United States won again. So we make some pretty good wines, and Napa and Sonoma are arguably one of the finest wine regions, if not the finest in the world. And we are thrilled to be able to call Ana a friend and have you go visit and taste these wines in person. So as we sign off this week, I want to let you know that next week we will not have an episode, because it is Memorial Day weekend. So we want you to relax. We want you to essentially say thank you to the people that made that weekend possible. And many of you know that one of our charity partners that we've worked with for years is Folds of Honor, and they're a military charity. They have one, I think, the finest slogans, where it is honor their sacrifice, educate their legacy. So when you have fallen soldiers that have left behind widows and children, and they need an education, so Folds of Honor helps in that capacity. But next weekend, have a barbecue, as we tend to do in America. Have some petite sirah, some burgers, but definitely, pay thanks in some small way, shape yourself with a donation to anywhere you want, because we're all lucky to be here, and someone has actually paid the ultimate sacrifice. 2 weeks from now, we are going to have the banking crisis. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, finances, and Mom always said money doesn't grow on trees, and running a winery is fairly expensive. So we're going to learn how that banking crisis influenced things. We are indebted to you, Ana. Thank you for spending some of your Friday with us. I can't wait to see you in person very, very soon. All of you Cellar Angels out there, be good to one another. Have a great weekend, and we will see you in 2 weeks. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.